to fulfill their missions. We are here today with the online community meetup group. And what this group does is basically meet monthly to talk about online community best practices. Most of us are online community managers. Some of us are social media managers. Some of us are active online community participants. And some of us, like Jayne, do all of the above. So I just wanted to go through some little housekeeping notes before we get started. First of all, this is our Twitter back channel. We're using TweetBeam tonight instead of Twitterfall. Mainly because the problem with Twitterfall, although don't tweet this, is that the tweets that showed up on Twitterfall were old. So we're trying this new tool. We've used it a couple times. We'll see how it works. In order to be featured like this, use the hashtag OCTribe. We're also live streaming tonight, courtesy of our volunteer, Gregory Go. Smile and wave. Thank you, Gregory. So this means that the live stream link is happening right now and is tweeted out by Crystal, that girl Crystal, volunteer extraordinaire, and also on our Facebook group, and is also on the meetup.com page. If you have not signed up for the meetup.com page, it will notify you every single month of these meetups and also job announcements. So sign up at meetup.com/OCTribe. The live stream will also be recorded and archived for your post-viewing pleasure. What else do I want to tell you? I want to, first of all, acknowledge my incredible volunteers. So can the volunteers stand up and wave, and the ones in the front come out for a second? Yay! Thank you. Thank you, guys. I have a wonderful team of volunteers. Some people are not even standing, even though they are volunteers. But that's okay. Thank you guys so much. If you'd like to volunteer, I'm always looking for them. I want to open the floor to people who have job announcements. Does anyone in the room have an open job announcement? Ariel. And Ariel, why don't you tell the group who you are and what you do at TechSoup Global?
Hi, I'm Ariel Gilbert-Knight. I am the Senior Content Manager at TechSoup Global, and we have a job opening for a community manager. So it will be the social media voice of TechSoup, as well as creating and implementing our social media strategy, and managing our forums, and managing our small but fabulous community team. So we thought this would be a wonderful group to announce this job opening to. You can find it at techsoupglobal.org/jobs. The listing will be there. We hope to hear from some of you.
Also wanted to, there's another volunteer, Matt Fairchild and Mia, they're great. Also wanted to say that anyone who is looking for a job or a gig, raise your hand so people can schmooze afterwards. Find these people. And anybody that has a volunteer position, raise your hand if you have anything, an opening, like you'd like to have a volunteer, a community volunteer. Softball, Mike. Mike's looking for an online community volunteer. I also am looking for online community volunteers. So with that, I think I've covered all the bases. We have a Facebook group, we have a hashtag, we have the meetup group. We have some speakers coming up in the next few months. We have Crystal in February talking about community management at Ning and how, what else? Managing big change in your community. March, we have Megan Murphy from Twilio. We're talking to a couple other people like Brandon Akiva for next couple months and some other people. So continue to sign up on the list. I think that's everything that I have to say. I am Susan Tenby. I forgot to say who I am. And I'm working for the newest division of TechSoup, which is called Caravan Studios. And we're focusing on building apps for nonprofits and working on building tools for nonprofits. So that's a new direction because TechSoup really has provided solutions and services, and kind of technology community. But we've never built tools for nonprofits, so our team is. And that's at Caravan Studios on Twitter, and I am at SUZBOOP on Twitter, like there. And with that, I am so happy to bring into the room the first community member of TechSoup. When I launched the TechSoup forums back in 2001, I pretended to be 8 different people talking to each other, and it was really difficult. And then I decided to go into other technology nonprofit communities and find people who were smart and get them into our community. So I did it using Outlook, and I sorted by who. I signed up for like 20 listservs that were appropriate, and I did a who sort, and this name kept coming up, and it was Jayne Cravens. And so I thought, maybe I should introduce myself to Jayne Cravens. And so here we are. She started as a volunteer with us. Since then, she is a nonprofit technology community consultant. She's a volunteer manager. She's worked for the UN. She's worked for us. She is working for us right now, managing the TechSoup forums. She's worked for Impact Online, which is now Volunteer Match, which Sherry is the community manager of. She worked for the University of Texas. She's writing a book. She is the leading world's expert on online volunteering. So you guys are in for a big treat. And her Twitter handle is jcravens42. So give it up for Jayne Cravens. Oh, and I only met her once in the 13 years that I've been working with her in person.
Thank you. God, thank you so much. Since we don't work face-to-face, you think it would be kind of awkward, but it's not at all. I feel like I talk to you every day. I mean, it's not awkward at all. So yes, I'm Jayne Cravens. I've somehow finagled my way into becoming this expert in virtual volunteering, which I still don't know how that happened. And Susan asked me to present tonight on I thought, a pretty interesting subject, which is, there's all of this great learning about volunteer management. There's all this great best practices. There's all these learnings. And I apply those when I manage an online community, because to me, community members are volunteers. And not everybody sees them that way, but that's always how I've managed online communities. And I've managed a lot of online communities. I'm not even going to go there. I'll say this, the first online community I managed was SOS.org nonprofit on Usenet. So I've been doing this a while, and I've always approached it from a volunteer management perspective. And so Susan said, why don't you do a presentation on how you do that? And you guys can take what you want. You can totally reject my ideas tonight. I really am not sensitive to that. So I thought it was a great topic. So I've never quite presented this way before. As she said, she told you a little bit about me. And I think it's really important for a speaker to justify why they're up here. So this is my justification, is that I actually read and research constantly about community management and online volunteering. I'm always doing that. I'm always looking for new ideas. And I also really try to practice reach. So I won't tell you anything tonight that I haven't tried and maybe failed at. So that's a little justification. And I have a modus operandi when I present. Because I was at a presentation once and I got up to present on virtual volunteering, and someone raised their hand and they said, is this what this is going to be about? Because if this is what this is going to be about, I don't want to be here. And I had no idea how to answer the question. So I decided maybe I need to just do a little modus operandi to talk about how things are going to work tonight. First of all, don't consider that a stupid question, just a confusing one. And I won't laugh at you if you ask a question. I'll just laugh later, but not here. I welcome your questions. I think all of you have knowledge worth sharing, so please don't leave me up here speaking the whole time. I'd really like to hear from you too. Probably goes without saying, I'm not offering a blueprint, and your mileage may vary. I would really like to unpack jargon, so if you say something tonight, I may ask you what that means. I may know what it means, I probably don't. I just would like for you to explain the jargon so that maybe everybody can understand what you're saying. And I hate to say this, but I don't have all the answers. I know, maybe I should leave now. Maybe I should leave right now. So how I define volunteers. I've got all this text here, but it's pretty much anybody that's contributing to your organization that you're not paying. And that could even mean someone else is paying them. That could mean an employee on loan. A corporation could provide you with an executive on loan once a week. You're not paying them. Someone is. I would put that person under volunteering. You don't have to. And that's what I want to stress tonight. I'm going to talk about volunteers from this perspective, community members, pro bono consultants, and people that contribute to your online community. And I hereby give you permission to reject everything I say. That's just me. Volunteer is a loaded term. Some people don't like to be called volunteer. I come up with something else. That's fine. That's fine. So why involve volunteers? This is a big deal with me. This is a very big deal with me. Any presentation I do, I talk about why to involve volunteers. And what you won't see up here, and you don't have to read this now, is they save money. because volunteer time is worth $14.13 according to the independent sector. Because what that does is, for instance, unions will say, then we are against volunteer involvement. Then we don't like volunteers. And actually, the International Association of Professional Firefighters has come out against volunteer engagement because of statements like that. So there are better reasons to involve volunteers, because sometimes volunteers are the best people for the task. They come from a different perspective, not a financial perspective. They might speak a little more openly. And if you go through all the reasons about why you involve volunteers, a lot of times they're the reasons you have an online community. Because you want feedback from a variety of people, because you want to create a way for people to be involved in your organization, and maybe this is the only way they could be involved. So all those reasons to involve volunteers can often be the same reasons you've started an online community. There's a big change happening right now in volunteer engagement, and I think it's affecting community engagement as well, online community engagement, and that is that it used to be find tasks for volunteers to do. Look for things for volunteers to do. And it's changing now, and now it's reserve certain assignments specifically for volunteers. Actually reserve things for volunteers and say, you know, we're not going to have paid staff do that. We want volunteers to do that task specifically. And think about your community membership. You know, that's just what you've done. You've decided your community would the best contributors would be people you're not paying in many cases to contribute. Maybe you are in some cases, but that's really a reflection of this trend that's happening. So keep that in mind. So there's multiple ways to volunteer with an online community. There's the basic, you know, somebody asks a question, somebody answers it. Do you think when somebody joins your community, they're a volunteer? What are your feelings about that? Just by joining, are you a volunteer, do you think? I'm just asking, I don't have an answer. You say no? Does anybody say yes? If I'm reading every post but not responding, am I participating?
No.
You say no?
I'm right.
And Susan's right. And I say it depends, because I've met a lot of people in online communities who never ever contribute online, and then I find out they did a presentation regarding what they saw in an online community. So it's fuzzy. But there's lots of ways that volunteers contribute to online forums, whatever. You know, sometimes they just participate in asking and answering questions. They may have long-term commitments. They may actually provide your IT support. They may moderate. They may do one event. They may manage one event. Long-term commitments, short-term commitments. Have you ever thought about your online community that way, is that these are volunteers with different roles? It's an interesting process to try to do. It may make you end up valuing them a little bit differently. But notice there's no one way to be a volunteer. Oh, a volunteer is somebody who contributes 20 hours. No, it could be somebody that contributes half an hour a month. It's not the time, it's just the fact that they contributed something and you didn't pay them. So this might be controversial, but I feel very strongly about this. Put volunteering roles in writing, even if it's just for you. So if you need a moderator, put it in writing exactly what you mean by a volunteer moderator, or a forum host, or a subject matter expert. Put it in writing. Even if you don't post it somewhere, even if it's not a contract, it keeps it clear for you what the volunteer responsibilities are. And actually, I used to work, well, I didn't, I inherited it, on the TechSoup forum. You'll see that if you click on volunteer, you'll see our stars and our royal court, and it says very specifically what they are required to do to be that type of volunteer. So put it in writing. I believe very strongly that volunteering roles, even in an online community, should have a start and end date. And when I say an end date, a person can re-up. But I believe very strongly in giving somebody an end date. Why do I do that?
It's a nice way to cut the band-aids. volunteers who have compassion but may not contribute.
Please pick up a little bit. The mic sucks.
It's a good way to. It's a good way to remove volunteers who have passion but don't actually contribute in that space.
Okay.
So there's another angle. That gives the volunteer an easy way out if they feel like they've overcommitted themselves and don't want to be stuck for life.
This is just a guess, but I think maybe it could be a call to action too in a way, because if you have only a given period of time, you want to get some things done.
You're all right. Everything that you said. And again, just because you give something an end date doesn't mean the person has to end then. They could re-up for 3 more months, for 6 more months. At TechSoup, they had open-ended volunteering commitment by the moderators, and my big suggestion was, why don't we have people re-up? And I think it's been really nice. A time of renewal has been sometimes an opportunity for people to go, I've been thinking about this a while, and I just got my contract, and I've decided, you know what, I wanted to share with you this. So it's been really nice. It's if I do say so myself, it was a good idea. Preferred time frame. Do you need your work done during a certain part of day? Can they do it at 3 a.m., 10 hours a month, whatever? You need a sign-off from the volunteer saying, yes, I will do this. I cannot believe how many people they give the assignment to the volunteer and then never hear back. And it's like, well, are they doing it or not? The volunteer needs to sign off, either literally or just with the word, yes, I'm going to do this. And you need to be clear about what support you're going to provide the volunteer. What are you going to help that volunteer do as an online community contributor? And a protocol for reporting problems. How many of you have a protocol for reporting problems? Okay, it's a really good idea for your volunteers to know, if I see something wrong on the community, how do I report that? If I suspect something is going wrong, who do I tell? If I get an inappropriate email from another community member, who do I report that to? I mean, that's happened to me. So you need to explore those things. And again, these are all volunteer management, sorry, it's late. These are all volunteer management systems. These are all things we do when we manage volunteers. And I think they're really good to do with community management. So why put roles in writing? I just think it really reduces misunderstandings. I just think it really, I fire far less or let go far less community members or volunteers when things are in writing. In fact, I've never fired a volunteer. We've mutually agreed that they're going to quit. I've never had to say, you're gone. And a lot of times I think it's because things are in writing. I can point to, we agreed to this, and it hasn't happened. And it makes it easier to recruit volunteers. And I really think in the long run, it creates less work for you. I really think in the long run, if you'll put the time in to put all this in writing, it's less work for you. Online, you might want to create an online community specifically for your leadership volunteers in your community. So you might want a place for your super users, your moderators, your facilitators, your subject matter experts to talk, off the group. One caution about that. We do that with TechSoup and it works great, but sometimes they start a discussion and I'm like, guys, please take this out to the greater community. Please let them all contribute. Anyone else have that experience? Did I see a hand go up? No? Yes, you do? Yeah. So definitely think about creating an online community where people can say, wow, George, I don't know about him. But be cautious, because some of the best conversations where they have, where are we going with this community? That needs to be out, I think, in the community at large. This I find lacking in a lot of online communities. I find this really lacking, and that is, how does a person express interest in a leadership role in your community? Do any of you have a protocol now for that? Do you have something on your website that says, want to be a moderator? No. Fail. Yes.
I have an example of an anti-pattern. couple of us here worked on something called the Palace back in the late 90s, early 2000s. And the protocol was if you expressed an interest, you were prohibited from having a leadership role. That's an anti-pattern for you. Dreadful, but amazingly self-reinforcing inside the community.
So someone else had to identify a moderator and invite that person to be.
Yeah, creates cronyism. Really bad.
Interesting, interesting. Interesting model. Thanks for sharing.
There's the semi-transparent model, which is what I did with the TechSoup forums, where if I saw, and I kind of do it here actually with this meetup, where if somebody kind of expresses interest and starts participating a lot, then I reach out to them individually and say, hey, and it's semi-transparent because there is a page that says, like, at least on the forums, like, how to be a TechSoup star. At least you start next to someone's name, you wonder what it is. So it's like semi-transparent, but you know, in terms of like a documented career path, I had that internally, but I wasn't super transparent about it externally.
Well, and that's okay because you have it up. I mean, it's up on the forum. It's just evolved.
Yeah.
Sometimes I try to do the same thing. I try to follow your model and look for community members. I go, wow, they've posted 20 really great posts in the last 6 months. But I miss some people sometimes. So I think it's a good idea to just communicate how people can be, you know, that they can self-select. Doesn't happen often. People are very humble on our community. I think it's important to track every expression of interest. So if somebody expresses an interest in doing something with your community, you need to track that. Because if 100 people expressed interest and none of them became a volunteer somehow beyond just contributing, why is that? What's the problem? So, and when I mean track, a spreadsheet. It doesn't have to be anything, you know, super complicated. And also have a protocol for what happens when someone expresses interest. What's the protocol? They go, yes, I want to help. And you go, great. Well, I actually have a protocol. And it's that they have to fill out their online profile in a certain way. They have to make an introduction in a certain way. And if they don't do that, they've just screened themselves out. And I don't have to worry because they've actually proven that they wouldn't make the cut.
But do you have that out in the open, or that's what you...
It is out in the open. It is on there. And it's on the sheet where it says how to volunteer. It's amazing how many people will express interest, but they haven't read that. So I have to send them back and say, well, as you will see on this page. And how will you make the decision on who gets to be a moderator or who gets to be a subject matter expert? How are you going to make that decision? You need to really think about that. Is it just going to be you? Well, sure. Are you going to let the community vote? I have no idea. It's up to you. But you need to really think about how you're going to make this decision. And believe it or not, in volunteer management, there's a lot of people who haven't thought it this far through. It's not just community managers. You had a question? Yes?
Yeah. In a situation, in a situation where somebody enthusiastically expresses interest in being a manager, and you see the behavior of the system in the community, and it's not like this competition. That's a different.
Yeah, so that's a great comment, that sometimes people express interest in a leadership role like moderating or facilitating, but you've seen how they behaved and you're like, you haven't really proven to be maybe the nicest person, or you haven't been proven to be housebroken. So is that a comment or is that a question of how to?
It's always been a problem for me.
It's always.
Especially if that person and following because he or she is so outspoken.
Excellent point. So the person may have a kind of a fan club, and because they're outspoken, a lot of people like them. That's the same problem in just general volunteer management. And I'll give you an example. In April, I'm going to speak to the organization that runs all the Mennonite thrift stores in the U.S. because they have volunteers, they have entrenched volunteers who have fans. You know, I've been here 20 years, and they need younger volunteers. And that's going to mean breaking hearts. And that's actually what I'm going to call my presentation, How to Break Hearts in Your Volunteer Management Program. Because the presentation is going to be about how to say no, how to scale back, how to let go of somebody who's very popular, and you may actually lose some people. Just like in an online community, you're all nodding your head when that person has to leave and people are like, well, if they're going to go, I'm going to go. It happens. It's a natural evolution of volunteer management. It's a natural evolution of an online community. You have to decide which Band-Aid to rip off, I guess.
Some people use the gardening metaphor.
Some people use the gardening metaphor. It's not easy. So I think the qualities of a great intake process for when people want to be volunteers with an online community or with any group is it should take minutes or maybe a couple of hours. It should not take days and weeks. So if somebody expresses interest, it shouldn't be weeks or months later that they find out if they're going to get to be a volunteer. I also think if you say, yes, I want you to be my subject matter expert on this subject and I want you to be the moderator, you need to very quickly get them started. It should take minutes. It should take days, not weeks and months. I think a good intake process screens people out that would be inappropriate. So, for instance, you can say, people who are very diplomatic and make people feel good about their online posts. And sometimes that will make people go, wow, I don't think I want to be a moderator because I don't want to have to give up my free speech. I don't want to have to give up my, outspoken ways. And let's face it, you have to be. If you're going to be a moderator or facilitator, you're going to have to dial it back because you've got to include everyone. I think it screens in volunteers that do have the time. One of my frustrations in promoting virtual volunteering is people go, oh, virtual volunteering is great. It's perfect for people that don't have time to volunteer. And I just, no, it still takes real time. You just don't have to look for a parking place. So I think a good intake process has some barriers. Don't make it totally easy. Make them jump through some hoops. And I think it sets a tone for your entire process. If you treat it very professionally, if you treat it very soberly and seriously, they're going to go, oh, wow, this is for real. This isn't just, hey, I get to be an online moderator. Woo. They're going to see, oh, this is for real. And I think that ultimately, I know this seems like bureaucracy, but ultimately, this reduces the amount of time you have to spend holding your volunteer's hand. I really think ultimately it's a time saver. Screening, the processes we use in just general volunteer management are things like completing an application. Well, with, for instance, TechSoup, you have to fill out your online profile. So that's the parallel. Maybe you have to do an interview, and the interview could be via email. I love to do interviews via email. I love when people say, I'm really great at responding to email. They tell me that face-to-face, and then I email them, and they never respond. So I really love online, that type of give and take as a screening process. You may need to do testing. That's pretty rare in volunteer involvement, including online community management. You may need to do reference checks. And again, if it's an online community where you're going to be talking about clients, you're going to be talking about child sexual abuse, yeah, you may need to do a reference check. You may need to even maybe do a police background check. That does happen. You may need to look at a LinkedIn profile. Although, with that said, does anybody think that's inappropriate to look at a LinkedIn profile as a screening for a volunteer or an online community person? How do you feel about that?
I think it's standard.
You think it's standard?
I think if you have a Facebook, I mean, if it's out there, you're going to probably look for it. If somebody keeps their profile public, that's their game. And I think I look always at somebody's LinkedIn before I even have a conversation with them professionally.
Okay, so seems like the general consensus in the room is, hey, LinkedIn and even Facebook if it's public. I'm kind of with you. I mean, to me, if you made your Facebook public, you're publishing. Make it private if you didn't want a potential employer or whatever to look at it. But believe it or not, I've done these workshops and I've had some people say, absolutely not, that's off limits, which is weird to me because isn't that what LinkedIn's for?
It seems like it would be context-based. I mean,
Context-based.
I can completely see situations where the job I need for a volunteer
and how they behave on Facebook, or it may not even reflect it on LinkedIn, or they may not actually have a good LinkedIn profile. But what I need for a volunteer, it doesn't necessarily reflect.
Exactly. Context. What he said was that maybe what he needs them for wouldn't be reflected in their LinkedIn profile. Maybe what they have on their LinkedIn profile just is not in context with what he's going to perhaps involve them for. And you're exactly right. It's all within context. Again, your mileage may vary. You really have to, is this appropriate? Is this not? Yeah, criminal background check, that's pretty rare, I guess, for you all, but it does happen. An online community, if you want to see some of these things in practice that I'm talking about that you might not do, is, you heard of Perverted Justice? They're the group that they're the volunteers that do How to Catch a Predator. And I wanted to see how they screen their community members. I wanted to know how you even become involved. And their whole process is they watch how you interact in the community and they identify you. They identify candidates that they think they want to take to a next level. And so it was really fascinating. And in that case, you better believe if you come to the next level, you're going to have to do a criminal background check. You're going to have to, if you want into their community, they've got a pretty high bar. Good group to look into if you want to see just how intense this process can be. And yeah, this gets into different degrees of screening. And I'll use the volunteer management as an example. If I'm doing a beach cleanup, I am not going to do a criminal background check of volunteers. If I have an online community that's going to discuss Harry Potter, I'm probably not going to do a criminal background check of volunteers. If I have volunteers that are going to meet face-to-face with children, yeah, I'm probably going to do a criminal background check of the volunteers. If I have an online community like Perverted Justice, which is doing some pretty intense things around talking to predators online and identifying predators, yeah, I'm probably going to do a criminal background check to make sure that they aren't. So it's in context. You're not, screening varies. It really varies. So don't think anything I'm saying is, oh, we have to do this for all of our community members. No, you don't. Because your goals of screening with volunteers, just in your community or in any context, is you not only want to screen out people who would be criminally dangerous, you want to screen out people who can't do the job, in essence. Training, I don't really want to get into this. Okay? Training. Sometimes you got to train people, sometimes you don't. Tracking and supervision. Now this is harder. It's easier for a community, for an online community, because how many hours has a person contributed? Well, I could go online, and I actually just did this. I just did a big analysis of the TechSoup community. Who are the super users from the last year? Who are the super users from the last 6 months? How many messages did they post? I have all sorts of candidates now to try to get to be moderators or facilitators. That's the great thing about online community facilitation. You have all this data. Most organizations that involve volunteers don't. So how do you know, for instance, I'd like to hear, how do you know your community members that have leadership roles or subject matter experts, how do you know they're happy? You ask them. How do you ask them?
How are you doing?
Just out in the air? How do you ask them?
I'm going to give them a temperature check. What I would do is literally check in every day. How you doing? What you've been up to? What's your sanity check? Via chat, and also maybe a weekly update, which would there'd be different categories, like summary of like the temperature of the community, the temperature engaging their side of it as well. So that's how I do.
Anybody else? Yes.
So I do a kind of combination of a regular, whether it's monthly or bi-monthly, check-in call, telephone call with the group so that they can talk to each other, because I think a lot of volunteer managers overlook the connections that they can make between volunteers, which is pretty valuable. It's not just between you and the volunteer. So I do that kind of open town hall. And then I also try, if I have time, to take all of them out to coffee who are local, or a call or something with everyone. I just kind of once in a while will say, hey, let's just check in. And there's never really an agenda. It's just And then you have to have a thick skin and say, hey, so what am I doing wrong? And like, you know, being told, hey, you're micromanaging the...
Back off.
Yeah, exactly. And then you have to just have a thick skin and take it and say thank you for the feedback. But that's how I do it.
Anybody else? Well, that's volunteer management 101, which is taking the temperature of your volunteers, taking the temperature of your community. SurveyMonkey's great, although it can be really hard to get people to respond. I like picking up the old-fashioned phone and just calling somebody and just saying, I just wanted to know how you're doing. And Susan is really good about that. You know, just, hey, I need to call you today. I just want to find out what's going on. It's very personal. It works really well. It's how you know if volunteers are happy, dissatisfied. They may seem great, and on the online calls with other volunteers say, I'm happy, 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 and you talk to them face to face, and they're like, absolutely, actually, I'm miserable. And I've gotten that from some volunteers I thought were really happy, and it turned out, wow, they're really not happy. I think it's really important to report how the volunteers are feeling, how your online community members are feeling, because those are successes that actually donors like to hear about. If you must know, you know, ask community members who have a leadership role to send you a report every month or an email, and then use that. Use that in your reporting. Cut and paste. You could I feel very strongly of making reporting a part of volunteer, your requirement. It's in your list of things you have to do as a volunteer, which is you have to report. Don't just ask for hours. 10 hours this month. That's nice. What your reports include, blah, blah, blah. You're tracking goals, you know this. Well, I mean, it's, you know, we've discussed this, tracking and supervision resources, conducting surveys, you know, managing an online group, crunching data. Your volunteers can do this for you. I'm amazed that tonight I told somebody, she was like, I just don't have time to crunch the data. I just don't have time. And I said, why don't you get a volunteer to do that? There's a lot of volunteers that would love that opportunity. And she went, oh, we've got all these capstone candidates who need a volunteering gig. And I'm like, that's a great gig for a capstone candidate, a university student. They love to do surveys and crunch data. So let volunteers improve your program. If you need a handbook, have the volunteers write it. And again, that's not so you don't have to do it. That's because they may make a better handbook. They can test your online volunteer orientation. They can do role playing. I love to have volunteers test things. And I know I'm flying through this, but the point is you can type anything to Google or Bing, and you can find all sorts of examples, volunteer applications, volunteer policies, sexual harassment policies, that are necessarily online community policies. Steal them from Big Brothers, Big Sisters if you need to. You know, there's lots of great things to borrow. Volunteer task descriptions if you don't know how to write these. Legal questions. That comes up a lot among online volunteers. Who owns what an online volunteer creates? So those are the type of questions you can get answered. And, oh, I have this AmeriCorps thing. I don't know why. And I also want to point out that there's some terrific volunteer management resources that you can use in your online community management. One of my favorites is energizeinc.com, which is by Susan Ellis. And she literally wrote the book on American volunteerism. And I think it's called The History of American Volunteerism. She is the largest publisher of volunteer management books. If you've read a volunteer management book, she probably published it. She may not have written it. She may have. She's amazing. Please check out her website. And she's my co-author on the last virtual volunteering guidebook, which goes on sale at the end of this week. It's an ebook, it's a Kindle, and it's a hardback book. Please buy one. My own website, coyotecommunications.com. I've got Oregon volunteers up there because from another old presentation, in Oregon's where I live. But your state, California, has a wonderful website, the California Volunteers website. National Service Resources. That's for National Service, AmeriCorps, Senior Corps. They have great resources, templates and policy manuals. Go there, steal, Google and Bing. You know, just type things in. You can find all sorts of great volunteer management resources you can use in your online community management. So let's open up to questions and discussion. And stuff. Yes.
I've always used, be selective. I'd be selective about who I allow to be a volunteer. And then I made pieces on this kind of advisory board or collaborative board, troubleshooting helpers, because they get to know your community from a different vantage point than you do.
One of the things I didn't do tonight, and I'm glad you brought that up, is how to recognize volunteers online. And asking volunteers to join a committee is volunteer recognition. Think about it. I know you think asking volunteers to do more work. That's actually, I am so valuable that this organization wants me to serve on a committee. It's actually very powerful volunteer recognition. There's lots of ideas online about how to recognize online volunteers. That's one of my favorites. Yes.
So I didn't run this program at the last place I worked, which was a large wiki-style Q&A, but they had several volunteer programs. One was really high-level editing, but they had set up a feeder program that was easy tasks, but it became the training ground and the filter for this other level. Prior, it wasn't set up that way, it was a mess. Once that got established as that, it became a really great training ground. And the quality of these much more sensitive volunteers, or rather that they had much more ability and power, it just improved it.
That's a great point, and I bet for the volunteers it just felt like, ooh, I just immediately got started. They have no idea of all the work you did behind the scenes. It just feels like, ooh, I just got started. Yeah, good for you.
Angela, I was just going to ask if you could talk more about fostering volunteer connections and activities.
She wants to know if you can talk more about volunteer connections and activity. That's really hard. I have set up a lot of communities for volunteers where I'm working in an organization and I want volunteers to talk to each other. And it is the hardest thing I've probably ever done. And the reason is, in a lot of cases, the volunteers aren't working together and they just don't feel like they have that much in common. They want the community starts, and then everybody sits around and waits for somebody else to talk. What I found is, you know how we're really into stay on topic, stay on topic, stay on topic? For the first few months, I keep it wide open. If somebody wants to post their wedding pictures, post your wedding pictures, your pictures of your sick dog, because that's what bonded the volunteers. Those off-topic, no politics, but just, you know, things you're doing socially, things you're doing that are fun, your pictures from Flickr. For some reason, that kick-started online communities. I had an online community of UN volunteers. So they're kind of like the Peace Corps, that's the agency I worked for, but it was the United Nations. And we placed 5,000 volunteers a year in developing countries all over the world. And I could not get them to talk. And then somebody posted their wedding pictures. And somebody else posted their pictures. And then suddenly people started saying, well, you know, I'm having this problem with blah, blah, blah. And suddenly the community kicked off. Because they needed a mixer. I couldn't give them beer. So I gave them something social. So that's a good way.
Did you create a separate forum for off-topic conversations?
Ultimately, I did not. But I've done that before, where you split the forum. And you have a forum for off-topic, and you have a forum for on-topic. It can work brilliantly, or it can suck all the life out of your forum. Your mileage may vary. You have to decide what's best. You have to experiment. I've seen it work. I've seen it fail.
So I really agree with what you said about when the volunteers can humanize themselves with their pictures or vacation, then they really do start to see each other as people and form those communications. So I'm wondering about volunteer motivations. Like, people are motivated by all different things. So how do you take that into account when you're building up a volunteer base?
Great question. Okay, I am very controversial on this. A lot of volunteer managers say a volunteer should want to help from the goodness of their heart, be totally unselfish, They're only here to help your organization. I am not under that tent. I am, as long as you're not here to hurt anybody, welcome in. If you're looking for a job, if you're lonely, if you think it looks fun, come on in. And the reason is because those motivations can be selfish, but can turn into great work for me. So when it comes to motivation, I like to hear them, but I don't judge. I really welcome everybody. That said, wow, there are a lot of organizations that will not let you volunteer. If you dare to say, why do you want to volunteer? And you say, it looked like fun. And for some reason they think, oh, you're not going to be serious. I just did a workshop on volunteer management. It was a really intensive workshop for the roller derby leagues of Seattle and Portland. Awesome. Awesome. It was the most fun I've ever had. Training, it was amazing. It was like 7 hours long. The head of the organization, they all had their roller derby names. The head of the organization, her roller derby name is Mean. And so Mean would ask me a question, and I'd be like, I better get this right. Roller derby was fascinating because they won't turn you away if you say, I want to volunteer with roller derby because I want to meet girls. They won't turn you away because they've actually found some great volunteers who that was their original motivation, and now they're, some of their best volunteers, they're referees or whatever, because they screen out the people who really, that's all they wanted to do. And they end up screening in some fantastic people. So yeah, I'm a big tenor when it comes to motivation.
So when you're setting up all the structure and expectations, and especially when talking about a certain number of hours, how do you take into account the legal side with, especially when it says this definition, these guys are paid employees, and how do you protect yourself for that?
Okay, that's a problem in England. It's not a problem here. Here you get to say, to be a volunteer, you have to volunteer 20 hours or you can't be a volunteer. You're right. In England, if you do that, they're an employee and they can sue for back wages. The reason that people have sued when they've said, I'm a volunteer, you owe me wages, is when they're working side by side with somebody who is paid to do what they're doing as a volunteer. That's when you start getting into weird legal things. So that's why I think it's so important to say, why is this assignment specifically a volunteer assignment? Why? You have to be able to say that. Because if you can't, that's when you can get into trouble. There have been some organizations that have had to pay up. There have been some organizations that haven't. That's why it's very important to volunteers do what volunteers do, paid employees do what they do. There can be some overlap, of course, but it's very important to say why you involve volunteers and never say it's to save money. And to be very specific about the reason we're doing this is because we want the community involved. We want the community to have a sense of ownership, etc. There are some organizations that won't let volunteers apply for paid staff positions because they're so scared of something happening like that. With, for instance, volunteer firefighters and paid firefighters, it's a matter of what they're trained to do and what their level of responsibility and risk is how they don't get into trouble with that. But that's an excellent question. And you are?
My name is Sherry. I work at Volunteer Match. Yes, well, one of them. This question is actually somewhat related. I love the idea of recognizing and encouraging volunteers to become leaders in the community by, inviting them to special forums and giving them more responsibility and all that. What if members of your own staff are very uncomfortable with that idea of giving volunteers a more official voice of the organization? How do you overcome that?
Such a good question. Not that the rest of them weren't.
That's a great question, and that's actually an entire presentation. Because that is a big issue. Because think about it. You have staff that are watching you give the volunteers mugs and a special event and thank yous, and they're like, hold the phone. I got very upset at UN volunteers because they said, you know what makes UN volunteers in the field so great is they have a special dedication. They're more dedicated. They're doing it from their heart. And I'm sitting there thinking, look, I know I'm paid, but I'm doing this from my heart. I have a special passion. Because they're unpaid, they have more passion than me, and I was getting angrier and angrier. And I actually went to the marketing people and I was like, ixnay on the don't do that. Because it really can make paid staff go, hey, wait a second. Also, paid staff can say, we can't let volunteers do that. And what my comeback always is on the we can't let volunteers do that because they're volunteers. As I say, so if we pay them, they somehow become confidential. If we pay them, they somehow suddenly understand privacy, and before they didn't. So things like privacy and confidentiality, that doesn't come with a paycheck. It comes with training. It's a training issue. If you have not trained, they should receive the same training as your paid staff on what is confidential, on how you are allowed to represent the organization and how you are not. And if you're not training your paid staff to do that, may I highly suggest you do that? And it should also be for volunteers. But I always love when people think paychecks are magical and somehow make people more committed. You know, oh, but they're volunteers. How do I know they'll do the job? Well, you know, a paycheck doesn't guarantee somebody's going to do a job. You'll fire both. In one case, you know, you get to save money. But in the other case, you're not paying the person. But yeah, paychecks are not magical. So that's usually what I say is, when somebody says, but what about safety? And I go, well, what do we do with paid people? Well, we're going to do the same thing with volunteers. Does that answer your question? And yeah, by the way, Susan Ellis has a kill presentation on staff volunteer relations. Hire her. She's amazing.
Other questions? Owen? Oh yeah, that's fine.
Pertaining to people that do any kind of community management, how do you leverage social media like Facebook and Twitter and get people to, you know, obviously you can have enormous, because you have billion Facebook users, but get them on there, but not, you know, have them stay on Facebook. So basically leverage that, especially as an online community, because I also have one myself, and it's kind of tough to compete with Facebook. So I have a music site, and if people want to find out about their favorite artists, one of the issues as well, they probably follow on Facebook. So how do you leverage Facebook to share your information for the community, but also still retain your users to share on your community as well?
I mean, I would say, I'm going to say that I do that all over the place in many communities that I manage. I wouldn't say it has to be either or. Just meet people where they're at. There are different people that go to Facebook and that refuse to sign up for this meetup group, even though I say, you sign up, you'll get reminded. But, you know, there are people that only want to get their information through Facebook. And there are people that only want to use Twitter but don't want to merge their Facebook with their professional life. And so you just have to have a presence in the places that you think are appropriate, meet people where they're at, and speak the appropriate language in all of those channels. So not just funneling the same message, but actually kind of using the tools in the way that they're supposed to be used.
Yeah, it's a great question, and that was a great answer. Yeah, you have to decide what's best for you. I like to keep encouraging people to come to the community. But that said, sometimes they live on Facebook, that's where they're going to live. Or they live on Twitter, that's where they're going to live. I mean, even Marty, we have a thing called Donate Your Brain. How many of you have heard of Donate Your Brain? Okay, a few of you. And that's a not my idea, that was Marty's idea, where we take topics on the online community on TechSoup that are under, you know, people aren't answering them, and we tweet them out as micro-volunteering opportunities. So, and micro-volunteers mean short, sweet, you don't have to, you know, sign some sort of application or whatever, you just do it and then leave. And they take minutes, they don't take, you know, hours. And it's a great way to then say, oh, well, you had such a good time, why don't you, you know, become a little more involved? And so we tag them with Donate Your Brain. And sometimes even Marnie, who invented this, will respond on Twitter and not on the forum when we've done this out. So, you know, it happens. You just have to decide, do you really want to drive people back to the forum constantly, or are you going to let them stay on Twitter or stay on Facebook? I know we didn't really answer your question, sorry. Okay, other questions? I really loved the legal question. Don't you have more legal questions? I love making legal stuff up.
So I just also want to do a shout out for Willie. There is another volunteer who's my volunteer at Caravan Studios. So thanks, Willie. It's been fun. So I think that with that, you guys should talk amongst yourselves and eat and drink. And thank you so much. And I guess you have about 40 minutes before there's a swift kick in the behind that will kick you out the door. So have fun and thank you so much. Thank you, Jayne.
Thank you.
The first Texas volunteer and such a superstar. And I guess I'll see you guys next month. Thanks so much.
And you don't have to go home, you just can't stay here.
That's exactly right. Oh, yeah. That's that you guys can go to 25 Lusk or Bar Basic after 8:45 if you still want to drink and talk. Thank you. And this